Some revelations don't arrive loudly. They arrive wrong. Wrong in a way that makes your stomach drop. Wrong in a way that forces you to reread the same line again and again, hoping you misunderstood it. That's where Prince Harry finds himself, confronted not by scandal, not by accusation, but by a number that should never have existed in the first place. Music, a number from the past, before fame, before there was anything to protect. Once that number appears, everything Harry believed about Meghan Markle stops lining music up. For years, he defended her story without hesitation. Every critic was wrong. Every question was noise. One voice in particular was dismissed entirely: Samantha Markle. She wasn't supposed to matter. But what happens when the person everyone told you to ignore turns out to be pointing at music, something printed, dated, and impossible to explain away? This isn't gossip. It isn't speculation. It's a timeline problem. And once music you see it, the story you thought you knew doesn't survive. Long before palace walls, before wedding bells, before Netflix cameras, music there was someone quietly questioning a timeline that never quite made sense. Samantha Markle wasn't chasing relevance. She wasn't reacting to fame. She was remembering birthdays, school years, moments that didn't align with what the world would later be told. She noticed changes, not dramatic ones, but subtle shifts that only someone close would recognize. Music. A year moved here, an age adjusted there. Nothing outrageous on its own. But together they formed a pattern that made her uncomfortable. When Meghan's public biography began circulating, Samantha didn't see a fairy tale. Music, she saw a version of events that didn't match the life she remembered growing up around. And when she spoke up, the response was immediate and ruthless. She was labeled jealous, bitter, vindictive, a disgruntled relative trying to cash in. Her credibility wasn't examined. It was music dismissed. But here's the part that matters. Samantha never changed her story. Not once. She didn't escalate. Music, she didn't dramatize. She simply repeated the same concern over and over again, even as the world laughed her off music because she wasn't speculating. She was recalling facts, and facts don't fade just because they're inconvenient. Music. The evidence didn't come from a courtroom. It didn't come from a palace archive. Music came from a place no one thought to question. March 1997. A teenage magazine sitting on a rack flipped through casually, forgotten, just as easily. Music inside it, a small lifestyle feature, nothing dramatic, just names and ages printed in ink. And there it was. Meghan Music Markle, 21 years old. Not suggested, not implied, printed. This wasn't written after fame. It wasn't touched by royal advisors or lawyers. It existed in a time when Meghan was unknown, when there was no benefit to altering a number, when no one was watching closely enough to care. And that's why it mattered, because if Meghan were born in 1981, as officially stated, she would have been 15 at Music the time, maybe 16 at most. But the magazine didn't list her as a teenager. It listed her as an adult. A 6-year gap, too large to dismiss, too specific to ignore. This single page didn't accuse anyone. It didn't speculate. It simply existed. And by existing, it challenged everything built after it. The story might have stayed theoretical if not for one crucial mistake. Prince Harry told the world too much. In his memoir, Spare, Harry didn't just recount events. He painted a scene. Archie's birth was described as calm, intimate, almost music dreamlike. Soft lighting, candles, music, a peaceful delivery, 2 epidurals, and then almost immediately, Meghan walking out of the hospital looking refreshed and ready. Music on the surface, it sounded beautiful. But beauty doesn't override biology. Anyone familiar with childbirth understands one unmovable reality. After an epidural, a mother cannot simply stand up and walk out. The medication numbs the lower body. Blood pressure must stabilize. Mobility returns slowly. Music. Observation isn't optional. It's mandatory. And yet, Harry's timeline suggested that labor, 2 epidurals, delivery, recovery, and discharge all happened within roughly 2 hours. 2 hours. That isn't unlikely. It isn't rare. It's impossible. The problem wasn't the emotion in Harry's words. It was the clock. Because once time enters the equation, the story no longer works. Music. And once a story doesn't work physically, it forces a far more dangerous question. What part of this was edited? This is where the age discrepancy stops being personal, music, and becomes medical. Pregnancy isn't judged by appearances, it's judged by risk. Music and risk changes dramatically with age. Any pregnancy over 35 is classified as advanced maternal age. After 40, it becomes high risk across the board. Music. Monitoring increases, tests multiply, hospital stays lengthen, discharge timelines stretch cautiously, not optimistically. If Megan was the age the public believed, music late 30s, the birth still required careful oversight. But if the earlier timeline is correct and she was in her early 40s, music everything changes. There would be no rushing, no quick exits, music no casual recoveries. The medical protocols alone would demand extended observation. Music, add epidurals into the mix, and immediate discharge becomes unthinkable. And suddenly the secrecy surrounding the birth makes sense. Music, the private hospital, the undisclosed medical team, the carefully limited information released to the public. This wasn't about privacy anymore. It was about control. Because the moment medical facts enter the conversation, narratives lose their flexibility. To understand why this mattered so much, you have to understand the worlds Megan moved through. Hollywood is ruthless with time. Roles disappear, casting doors close. Music. Youth isn't just admired, it's required. Shaving years off a resume isn't vanity, it's survival. Then came royalty. In that music world, age isn't about careers. It's about optics, fertility, heirs, timelines. A younger bride fits a fairy tale. An older one introduces urgency. One story sells romance. The other invites scrutiny. So, perfection became non-negotiable. Every music appearance, every photograph, every milestone had to align with a narrative that couldn't afford disruption. Because once one detail slips, the rest follow. Music, that's why the pregnancies were sealed tight, why timelines were controlled, why questions were deflected rather than answered. It wasn't about fooling the public, it was about protecting a story that couldn't survive examination. Every story reaches a point where memory alone is no longer enough. Music. That's where Thomas Markle enters. Not as a commentator, not as an angry parent, but as a man who kept records long before anyone thought they'd matter. Thomas wasn't music distant from Megan's early life. He raised her. He paid for her education. He documented milestones the way parents do, school years, achievements, moments frozen in time. His role wasn't emotional distance. It was involvement. Music. So, when Samantha was painted as unreliable, Thomas didn't hesitate. He looked directly into a camera and said something simple but devastating to the narrative that had already taken hold. Samantha had never lied to him, not once. Every concern she raised checked out factually. This wasn't a reaction to fame, it wasn't a counterattack, it was a correction. Music and corrections are dangerous when a story has already been sold as truth. With Thomas stepping forward, the issue could no longer be dismissed as sibling rivalry. Now music were records, a paper trail, a timeline rooted in lived reality, not public relations. The question was no longer who was telling the truth. It became which version of the truth had been promoted. This is where the story stops being about music, Megan, and becomes about Harry. For years, he defended everything. He believed every criticism was cruelty, every question was persecution. Music. He walked away from his family, his country, and his role because he believed music was protecting the truth. But what if the truth he protected was already edited? That realization doesn't come with anger. It comes with silence. Harry is now left standing inside a narrative he helped amplify. Music wondering which parts were real and which parts were rehearsed. His memoir, his interviews, his sacrifices, all built on trust. And trust once fractured doesn't shatter loudly, it settles slowly. Samantha Markle isn't celebrating. Thomas Markle isn't attacking.